Like sacrifice, the chain link fence rattles under your grip, the sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive hum of the city grid behind you. Ahead, the Astoria Tower stabs the night sky like a broken finger, a monolith of brutalist concrete and shattered glass that the city of Seattle seems to have excised from its memory. It is a dead zone in the middle of the skyline, a black tooth in a jaw of glittering gold. You coming, or what? Leo whispers, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the swirling mist. He's already through the gap in the fence, his varsity jacket snagging on a rusted barb. Wait up. Sarah hisses, clutching the strap of her camera bag. She looks at you, her eyes wide and reflecting the distant streetlights. Do you feel that? You do. You feel it in the marrow of your bones. It's a low-frequency vibration, a static charge that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand up. It feels like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. You rub your left shoulder, absent-mindedly scratching at the port wine stain that sprawls across your collarbone, a birthmark you've hated since childhood. It itches tonight. It burns. Just the wind, you lie, your voice sounding too loud in the dead silence of the courtyard. You squeeze through the fence, the rusted metal biting into your denim. You are the level-headed one, the survivor. You are the one who mapped the route, checked the security patrols, and packed the first aid kit. But as you step onto the cracked pavement of the Astoria's plaza, logic begins to bleed out of you. The building looms. 20 stories of decay. The legends say a cult operated here in the 20s, a group of high society occultists who believed the ground beneath the foundation was a vein of necrotic energy. They say people went in and never came out. They say the construction was never truly finished because the workers refused to pour concrete over the screams they heard coming from the basement. Doors open, Leo calls out, standing before the gaping maw of the main entrance. The revolving doors are smashed, shards of glass crunching under his boots like dry bones. You step into the lobby. The temperature plummets 20 degrees instantly. The air smells of wet rot, copper, and something ancient like dust from a tomb that has been sealed for centuries. Flashlights on. Keep them low. You command, your voice trembling slightly. The beams sweep across the lobby. It's cavernous, stripped of value. The marble desk is cracked in half. The wallpaper peels in long, fleshy strips, revealing the gray concrete beneath. But it's the silence that terrifies you. There is no sound of rats, no settling of the building, no wind whistling through the broken windows. The silence is heavy. It is watching. Let's get to the roof, Leo says, grinning, chasing the adrenaline. That's where the altar is supposed to be. We stick together, you warn. No wandering off. You head toward the stairwell, passing the elevator banks. The doors are pry open, revealing empty shafts that drop into infinite blackness. As you pass, you hear it a soft, wet slap of bare feet on stone. You spin around, your light slashing through the dark. Nothing but dust motes dancing in the beam. Did you hear that, you ask? Hear what? Sarah asks, her voice tight. She's filming everything, viewing the horror through the safety of a lens. Footsteps. You're tweaking, Leo laughs. But the laugh dies in his throat as he pushes open the heavy fire door to the stairwell. The stairs spiral upward into a throat of darkness. You take the lead, counting the flights. First floor, second, third. The air gets thicker with every step, tasting metallic. Your shoulder burns hotter now. A stinging sensation like a fresh tattoo. On the 7th floor landing, you stop. On the wall, painted in something that looks disturbingly like dried blood, which has turned black with age, is a symbol. It's a circle intersected by jagged, lightning-like fissures. It looks familiar, distantly, violently familiar. Creepy, Leo mutters, tracing the shape with his light. Taggers are getting creative. That's not spray paint, Sarah whispers, zooming in. It's stained into the concrete. Thump. The sound comes from directly above you. A heavy, singular impact, like a body hitting the floor. Hello? Leo yells up the shaft. Shut up, you hiss, grabbing his arm. Then comes the dragging sound. Something heavy being pulled across the floorboards on the landing above, and then a sound that freezes your blood, a low rhythmic chanting. It doesn't sound human. It sounds like multiple voices overlapping, whispering in a language that hurts your ears, a syntax of grinding stones and snapping tendons. "We need to go," Sarah says, backing down a step. "We need to leave. Now." "No," Leo says, eyes wide, fixated on the darkness above. "We came to see the ghost. We're seeing it." "Leo, this isn't right," you say, the instinct to survive screaming in your skull. "This isn't a haunt. This is a trap." Suddenly, the fire door on the landing above slams shut with the force of a gunshot. The echo rattles your teeth. Then, the door on the landing below you slams. You are sealed in. What the hell? Leo charges up the stairs to the 8th floor and kicks the door. Locked, he slams his shoulder against it. It doesn't budge. "Down!" you yell. You rush down to the 6th floor. You grab the handle. It's cold, ice cold. You turn it, but it's fused shut. The lights in the stairwell flicker. Not electrical lights, there is no power. Your flashlights flicker. All 3 of them, simultaneously. Darkness. For 3 seconds, you are blind. In the blackness, you feel a breath against your ear. It smells of ozone and old blood. A voice, dry as parchment, whispers a single word. "Return." The lights flare back on. You are standing next to Sarah. Leo is gone. "Leo?" Sarah screams. "Leo?" You spin in a circle. The stairwell is empty. There is no way he could have passed you. "Up," you say, your voice shaking. "He went up to the door. We have to go up." You scramble up the stairs to the 8th floor. The door Leo was pounding on is now slightly ajar. A thick, viscous darkness spills out from the crack. You kick the door open and raise your flashlight. You are in a hallway that stretches far longer than the building's dimensions should allow. The doors to the apartments are all open, and standing at the far end of the hall, barely illuminated by the fade of your beam, is Leo. He is standing rigid, facing away from you. "Leo?" you shout, running forward. "Don't do that, man!" He doesn't move. You get closer, grabbing his shoulder to spin him around. "Leo, we have to." Leo turns, but his face is gone. Where his eyes and mouth should be, there is only smooth, pale skin. No features, just a blank slate of flesh. Sarah screams, a sound that tears her throat. Behind Leo, a shadow detaches itself from the ceiling. It unfolds like a spider made of smoke and tatters. It is tall, impossibly tall, draped in rotting ceremonial robes that float as if underwater. The creature's face is hidden beneath a hood, but you can see its hands. They are skeletal, elongated, the fingers tipped with obsidian knives. This is the Wraith, the High Priest of Astoria. The creature places a long, clawed hand on Leo's faceless head. Crack. The sound of Leo's neck snapping echoes like a gunshot in the hallway. His body drops like a marionette with cut strings. The Wraith looks up. Beneath the hood, 2 points of burning blue fire ignite. It is looking at you, not Sarah. You. "Run!" you scream, grabbing Sarah's wrist. You bolt down a side corridor, abandoning the stairwell. You sprint blindly, vaulting over piles of debris. The building seems to shift around you. Walls elongate. Doors appear where there were none. You are running through a labyrinth designed by a madman. Behind you, the chanting rises. It's coming from the walls now. Sanctus, Apex, Cruor, my camera. Sarah is sobbing, stumbling. "It saw me. It looked right at me. It's hunting," you gasp, kicking open a door into what looks like an old ballroom. "Get in here." You barricade the door with a rotting banquet table. You back away, chest heaving. The ballroom is vast. moonlight spilling in through shattered floor-to-ceiling windows. But the moonlight isn't right. It's sickly green. You check Sarah. She's hyperventilating. You check yourself. Your shirt is torn at the shoulder. You look down at your birthmark. It is glowing. A faint, pulsating crimson light emanates from the port wine stain. What is that? Sarah whispers, pointing at your shoulder. You're bleeding. No, you realize, touching the skin. It's not blood. The mark has changed shape. The chaotic blotch has rearranged itself into crisp, geometric lines. It is the same symbol that was painted on the stairwell wall. A realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. The urban legends weren't about a cult finding a random victim. They were waiting. The ritual wasn't finished because they were missing the final component, the bloodline. I'm not supposed to be here, you whisper. I was drawn here. The barricaded door explodes inward. Wood splinters shower the room. The wraith floats through the debris. It doesn't walk. It glides, its feet trailing inches above the floor. The air around it freezes. Frost patterns bloom on the floorboards, racing toward you. Sarah, move! You shove her toward the windows. There's a fire escape. The wraith raises a hand. Sarah is lifted off her feet, suspended in the air by an invisible force. She kicks and claws at her throat, choking. Let her go, you scream. You step forward, driven by an instinct you don't understand. You feel power surging through the mark on your shoulder. Take me, I'm the one you want. The wraith tilts its head. The blue fires in its hood dim slightly. It flicks its wrist, and Sarah is thrown across the room, slamming into the wall. She falls unconscious, sliding to the floor. The entity turns its full attention to you. It glides closer. You can smell the grave dirt now, overpowering and suffocating. You want to run, but your legs won't obey. The mark on your shoulder is searing, a white-hot agony that anchors you to the spot. The wraith stops inches from you. It towers over you, a monolith of death. Slowly, it reaches out a skeletal hand. It doesn't strike you. It doesn't snap your neck. It points a long, obsidian finger at the center of the ballroom floor. You look down. The dust has been disturbed. Beneath the grime is a massive, inlaid mosaic, a pentagram encased in a circle of weeping angels, and in the center, a single empty stone slab. The altar, the vessel. The wraith's voice rasps, not entering your ears but vibrating directly inside your skull, has returned. You try to step back, but your body betrays you. You take a step forward, then another. You are walking toward the altar against your will. Your mind is screaming, stop, but your muscles are puppets on strings of agony pulled by the mark on your shoulder. No, you grit out. I won't. The wraith drifts behind you, hurting you. The cycle must close. You reach the altar. It is stained with layers of old brown residue. You know what it is. You climb onto the slab. You lie down. You are crying, tears streaming into your ears, but your body arranges itself into a position of total submission, arms spread wide, ankles crossed. The wraith hovers over you. It produces a dagger from the folds of its robes, a jagged blade of obsidian that seems to drink the light in the room. You stare up into the hood. You expect the killing blow. You expect the pain, but the wraith does not stab you. It reverses the grip on the dagger. With a sudden, violent motion, the wraith slashes its own spectral wrist. Ectoplasmic black sludge pours from the wound, dripping down onto your chest, onto the glowing birthmark. The pain is transcendent. It feels like molten lead being poured into your soul. You scream, arching your back off the stone. The black sludge sinks into your skin, merging with the mark. The wraith begins to dissolve, its form unraveling like smoke in a gale. It is pouring its essence, its power, its centuries of accumulation into you. It was never the master. It was the battery. You are the machine, Sarah. You choke out, your voice changing, deepening, becoming overlaid with the grinding sound of stones. From the corner of the room, Sarah stirs. She groans, clutching her head. She looks up and sees you on the altar. "Get up," she cries, scrambling to her feet. "We have to go." She runs to you, grabbing your hand to pull you off the slab. You sit up. The motion is mechanical, rigid. You look at Sarah. She freezes. She drops your hand and backs away, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "Your eyes," she whispers. "Oh God, your eyes. You can't feel your heart beating anymore. The cold of the building doesn't bother you. It feels like a warm blanket. You look at your hands. The veins are black. The birthmark has spread, covering your entire left side in complex, glowing, geometric scars. The hunger hits you then. Not for food, not for water. You are hungry for life. You stand up from the altar. The building rumbles, acknowledging its new master. The wraith is gone, consumed. The ritual is complete. The apex sacrifice wasn't a death. It was an ascension. "Sarah," you say. Your voice is a legion. It echoes from every corner of the ballroom. She backs into the shattered window frame, the wind whipping her hair. "Stay away from me. You cannot leave," you tell her, and you feel the doors of the Astoria Tower, 20 floors below, fuse shut with a thought. The ritual requires witnesses. You take a step toward her. The shadows in the room lengthen, reaching out to caress your ankles. You are the survivor, yes. You survived the wraith. You survived the night. But the person who walked into the Astoria Tower is gone. What remains is something ancient, something that has been waiting in your blood for generations to wake up. You smile, and the air in the room turns to ice. Welcome home. Still awake? Well, let's move on to the next story. Cobblestones, a subterranean breath composed of coal smoke, Thames rot, and the accumulated misery of a million souls packed too tightly into the brick-and-mortar labyrinth of the East End. It was the autumn of 1888, a season that would fester in the history books like a gangrenous wound, but for Aurelius, it was simply another Tuesday in a life that had spanned centuries. Aurelius stood atop the slate roof of a tenement on Dorset Street, his silhouette indistinguishable from the soot-stained chimney stacks. He was a creature of stillness. To be immortal was to learn the art of patience, to understand that time was not a river that carried you, but a lake in which you floated. He was tall, his frame gaunt but wired with a strength that could crush granite. His clothes were of fine make, a heavy wool coat, and a silk cravat, though the grime of the city had dulled their luster. He did not mind. Camouflage was essential. He took a breath, not because he needed the oxygen, but to taste the air. It tasted of gin. It tasted of unwashed wool. It tasted of fear. And increasingly lately, it tasted of copper. "Sloppy," Aurelius whispered, the sound lost to the wind before it passed his lips. Disgustingly sloppy. For 300 years, Aurelius had hunted in the shadows of Europe. He had fed in the ballrooms of Paris during the Terror, sipping from the doomed as they awaited the guillotine. He had stalked the trenches of the Crimea, taking the dying who would not be missed. His golden rule, the law that had kept a stake from his heart and his head upon his shoulders, was discretion. You take only what you need. You leave no mark that cannot be explained by disease, heart failure, or simple misfortune. You do not make a spectacle of the harvest. But Whitechapel had become a circus below him. The gas lamps flickered, casting sickly yellow pools of light that struggled to penetrate the pea-soup fog. The streets were crawling with the Metropolitan Police, the blue bottles, as the locals sneered. They marched in pairs, their heavy boots clattering, their whistles ready. They were hunting a ghost. They called him Leather Apron. They called him Jack. Aurelius called him a nuisance. Because of this, Jack, the streets were hyper-vigilant. The women of the night, Aurelius's preferred and most accessible herd, were terrified. They moved in packs or stayed indoors. The shadows, once Aurelius's exclusive domain, were now probed by lantern beams and suspicious eyes. This human butcher, this madman with a knife, was ruining the ecosystem. He was a poacher in the king's forest, shouting and firing a cannon at rabbits, scaring the game away. Aurelius's stomach tightened. A dull, dry ache. He hadn't fed properly in 4 nights. The hunger was not a voice. It was a physical contraction, a drying of the veins, a sandpaper friction behind the eyes. It was the itch that lived inside the marrow. He dropped from the roof. The descent was silent. He landed in the refuse-strewn alley with the grace of a spider, his knees bending to absorb the impact, his leather boots making no sound on the wet stones. He straightened and adjusted his cuffs. He needed to hunt. But tonight, he would hunt the hunter. He would find this Jack the Ripper, snap his neck, and dump him in the Thames. Only then would the police disperse. Only then would the fog belong to Aurelius again. He walked out of the alley and onto the street. He adopted the gait of a gentleman, slumming it, confident, slightly arrogant, a man who believed his money insulated him from the dangers of the East End. It was a disguise that worked on humans. They saw the top hat and the coat and assumed he was merely a predator of virtue, not a predator of life. He passed a pub, the 10 Bells. The noise spilled out shouting, a fiddle being played badly, the clinking of glass. He smelled the warm, pulsing blood of the patrons inside, a buffet behind glass, but he ignored it. Too many witnesses. The blood of drunkards was sour anyway. It tasted of despair and cheap spirits. Aurelius preferred the clean taste of the lonely. He turned toward Buck's Row. He wanted to revisit the site of the first major kill. He wanted to understand the mind of the beast he was tracking. As he walked, the fog seemed to thicken, swirling around his ankles like grasping hands. Aurelius sensed the city's mood. It was a living thing, this London. It was terrified. The psychic weight of 50,000 people holding their breath pressed against his mind. He reached the spot where Marianne Nichols had been found. The police tape was gone, the blood washed away by rain and the bucket water of disgusted residents. But to Aurelius, his senses, the stain was indelible. He knelt, touching the cold cobblestones. The tips of his gloved fingers brushed the grit. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply through his nose. The scent was old, fading, but the psychic residue remained. He could smell the terror, sharp, acidic, like lemons and bile, but underneath that, there was something else. Usually, when a human killed another human, the scent of the aggressor was pungent with adrenaline, sweat, and sexual release. It was a hot, frantic smell. It smelled of animal panic, even in the predator. This smell was cold. It was composed, methodical. There was no sweat. There was no frantic shaking of the hands. The cuts described in the papers, throats severed to the spine, abdomen ripped open, spoke of a frenzy, yet the scent trace suggested a surgeon's calm. Paradox, Aurelius murmured, standing up. He brushed the dirt from his knees. A human who killed with such passionless efficiency? A lunatic who possessed the discipline of a monk? It did not fit. The human mind was a fragile vessel. When it cracked enough to allow for such butchery, it usually spilled its contents messily. This killer was containing the spill. A sudden scream shattered the night. It wasn't a scream of surprise. It was a long, tearing shriek of absolute agony, the sound of a soul being evicted violently from its housing. It was the sound of wet biology being torn apart. Aurelius's head snapped toward the sound. Hanbury Street. He didn't run. He blurred. To a human observer, he would have appeared as a sudden gust of wind, a trick of the gaslight. He moved faster than thought, his muscles propelling him over carts and through narrow gaps in the fences. The world became a tunnel of gray fog and black brick. The smell hit him before he saw the body. It was an overpowering copper stench, so thick he could taste it on the back of his tongue. It was intoxicating. His own hunger roared, a beast rattling the bars of its cage, demanding he stop and partake. He shoved the hunger down with centuries of discipline. He vaulted a wooden gate and landed in the backyard of number 29 Hanbury Street. He was too late, but only just. The body of a woman lay near the fence. Annie Chapman, Aurelius, had seen death in all its forms. He had seen the aftermath of cannon fire, the rot of the plague, the work of the Inquisition, but the sight before him made even his cold, dead heart skip a beat. This was not murder. This was an unmaking. Her throat was slashed so deeply her head was nearly severed, but the horror was lower. Her abdomen had been thrown open, the intestines drawn out and draped over her shoulder like a macabre shawl. It was a display, a grotesque art installation made of meat and sorrow. The uterus had been excised. The steam was still rising from the cavity. The blood was still bubbling. Aurelius scanned the yard. His eyes, capable of seeing in near total darkness, darted from shadow to shadow. There, at the far end of the yard, near the passageway that led to the street, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was a man, or the shape of a man. He wore a long, dark coat and a slouch hat pulled low. He stood perfectly still, watching Aurelius. Aurelius felt a prickle of unease. He was a predator. He was the apex. Humans, even killers, should freeze or flee when they saw him. They sensed, on a primal level, that he was other. It was a biological imperative imprinted in their DNA from the nights when humanity huddled in caves. This figure did not flinch. "You," Aurelius said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the chest. "You are the one making the mess." The figure tilted its head. A soft, wet chuckle emerged from the darkness. It sounded like someone stepping in mud. "Mess?" the figure whispered. The voice was raspy, cultured, but damaged, as if the vocal cords had been scrubbed with glass. "I am painting, old one. I am painting the town red." Aurelius narrowed his eyes. "You are drawing the blue bottles. You are ruining the hunt." "The hunt?" The figure took a step forward. In his hand, a long-bladed knife glinted. It wasn't a simple pocket knife. It was a surgical amputation knife, the steel dark with fluid. The hunt is the only thing that matters. The fear. The release. Can't you smell it? It's exquisite. It's better than the gin, better than the opium. "You are a rabid dog," Aurelius said, stepping over the mutilated body of Annie Chapman, "and you need to be put down." Aurelius lunged. He moved with the speed of a striking viper, covering the 20 feet between them in a heartbeat. He reached out, his hand forming a claw, intending to crush the man's trachea. His hand closed on empty air. Aurelius stumbled, his momentum carrying him into the wooden fence. He spun around, bewildered. The man had moved. He was now standing near the back door of the house, 10 feet away. Impossible. No human moved that fast. No human nervous system could react to a vampire's strike with that kind of velocity. "You are slow," the Ripper said, his voice mocking, "heavy with years, dust and cobwebs." Aurelius hissed, his fangs extending, his human mask slipping. His eyes glowed a faint, predatory red. "What are you?" "I am the future," the Ripper said. The back door opened, and a resident, awakened by the noise, stepped out holding a candle. "Who's there?" The Ripper looked at the resident, then back at Aurelius. He tipped his hat. "Until next time, grandfather." With a movement that defied physics, the Ripper scrambled up the vertical brick wall of the house like a gecko, his limbs contorting at impossible angles, disappearing onto the roof. Aurelia stood frozen. The residents saw the body of Annie Chapman and began to scream. The police whistles blew in the distance, getting closer. Aurelius snarled. He looked at the wall where the killer had ascended. The mortar was scratched, deep gouges left in the brick, but the speed, the sheer, unnatural fluidity, it was insectile. He wasn't hunting a man. Aurelius fled into the night, the hunger burning in his gut, replaced now by a cold dread. He had found his prey, and for the first time in 300 years, he wasn't sure if he was the cat or the mouse. The weeks that followed were a blur of frustration and starvation. The double event occurred, Stride and Eddowes slaughtered in the same night. Aurelius was there, always just a step behind, finding the warm bodies, the grotesque arrangements of organs, the cryptic graffiti on the walls. The Jewess are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Aurelius became a phantom of the East End. He stopped sleeping. He stopped grooming. His fine coat became tattered. He subsisted on rats and the occasional stray dog, his strength waning. He refused to hunt humans while the police were so thick on the ground. The risk of exposure was too high. If the world learned of vampires, they would not fear them. They would industrialize the killing of them. He withdrew to his lair, a forgotten cellar beneath a burned-out textile factory in Spitalfields. It was damp, smelling of mold and earth, but it was safe from the sun. He sat in a high-backed velvet chair he had salvaged from a ruin, staring at a map of Whitechapel pinned to the wall. He had marked the kill sites in red ink. He analyzed the encounter in the backyard. The speed, the strength required to scale a wall that quickly, the lack of fear, and the smell. He closed his eyes and summoned the olfactory memory. Underneath the blood, what did the Ripper smell like? It wasn't human. But it wasn't a vampire either, not like Aurelius. Aurelius smelled of dust, of dried parchment, of something preserved. Vampires were static creatures, frozen in the moment of their death. They were statues of marble and ice. The Ripper smelled of rot. Active, wet rot, like a corpse left in the sun for 2 days. But he also smelled of immense power, a metabolism running hot and fast. A ghoul? Aurelius pondered aloud. No, ghouls were scavengers, cowardly eaters of the dead. They didn't hunt with such theatricality. A demon? Unlikely. Demons were transaction-based. This was pure indulgence. This was gluttony. He looked at his own hand. It was trembling slightly. He needed blood. The rats were not enough. He traced the lines on the map. The killings were escalating. The mutilations were becoming more severe. The Ripper was testing boundaries. He was looking for a masterpiece. He was looking for a place where he could work undisturbed. Miller's Court, Aurelius whispered. His finger rested on Dorset Street. It was a hive of vice, the worst street in London. The landlords there asked no questions. The screams were common currency. If the Ripper wanted a finale, a place where he could take his time, where the screams would be ignored as domestic disputes, it would be there. Aurelius stood up. The sun had set an hour ago. Tonight, he vowed. Tonight, I end it. He dressed with care. He sharpened his fingernails against the stone wall until they were like razors. He did not take a weapon. He was the weapon. He left the cellar and descended into the crimson fog. November 9th. The air was damp and unseasonably mild, which only made the stench of the city worse. The fog was a tangible weight, muffling the sound of the city, turning Spitalfields into a dreamscape. Aurelius moved through the streets. The atmosphere was oppressive. The silence was heavy, unnatural. Even the stray dogs seemed to have gone to ground. He reached McCarthy's Rents on Dorset Street. He could hear the hum of life inside the tenements, the coughing. the arguments, the weeping. It was a symphony of poverty. He focused his senses. He filtered out the noise of the city. He listened for the heartbeat. Thump thump, thump thump. Hundreds of them. Fast, slow, strong, weak. But he was looking for the silence. The absence of a heartbeat. Or the wrong kind of heartbeat. He moved into the courtyard. Miller's Court. Room 13. The smell hit him through the closed door. It was heavy, metallic, and sweet. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse floor at the end of a shift. But there was something else, a smell of ozone and burning fat. Aurelius approached the door. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle. He kicked the door just below the lock. The wood, rotten from years of damp, splintered with a crack like a gunshot, and the door swung inward. Aurelius stepped into the room. The scene inside defied description. It was a small room, lit by the fire in the grate, which was roaring unnaturally high, fueled by clothing and other things. On the bed lay what remained of Mary Jane Kelly. Aurelius had seen the battlefield of Waterloo. He had seen the torture chambers of the Spanish Inquisition. He had never seen this. She had been skinned. Not just killed, but dismantled. The flesh was stripped from the bone. Organs were arranged around the body like decorations on a mantelpiece. The heart was missing. The face was gone, hacked away until only a skull stared back. Standing over the bed, his back to Aurelius, was the man in the dark coat. He was humming a tune, a nursery rhyme. Pop goes the weasel. The Ripper turned slowly. His face was illuminated by the firelight. For the first time, Aurelius saw him clearly. He looked young, perhaps 25 when he died, but his eyes were ancient, black pits of absolute malice. His skin was pale, translucent, veins showing through like blue spiderwebs. But his mouth was smeared with blood, chin to nose, and his teeth, they were not the retractable, elegant fangs of Aurelius's kind. They were a mouthful of needles, rows of serrated shark teeth that seemed to crowd his jaw, pushing against his lips. "You're late," the Ripper said. He held up a piece of flesh, a kidney, and took a bite out of it like it was an apple. Blood ran down his chin. Aurelius felt a wave of revulsion so strong he nearly gagged. "You are vile," the Ripper swallowed. "I am hungry, just like you. I do not do this." Aurelius gestured to the carnage on the bed. "This is not feeding, this is desecration." "It is art," the Ripper shouted, his voice cracking. "It is fear. Look at it. Do you know how much terror was in her blood when I opened her? It tasted like champagne. You sip your stale wine in the shadows, afraid of the light, afraid of the police. I make the world look at me." "You are a child," Aurelius said coldly. "A fledgling. Who turned you? Who made such a mistake?" The Ripper laughed. A wet, gurgling sound. He threw the kidney onto the floor. "No one turned me, grandfather. I was dying of syphilis in a gutter in Whitechapel. My brain was rotting. I prayed to God, and he didn't answer. So I prayed to the other one, and something crawled into me. Something old. Something from the mud of the Thames." Aurelius realized then this wasn't a lineage vampire. This was a spontaneous generation, a mutation caused by the sheer concentration of evil and filth in this city. A necrotic accident born of the industrial age. "You are a cancer," Aurelius said, "and I am the surgeon." Aurelius attacked. He moved faster than he had in Hanbury Street, fueled by disgust and the ancient power of his bloodline. He slammed into the Ripper, driving him back against the wall. The impact shook the small room, knocking pictures from the walls. Aurelius grabbed the Ripper's throat, his fingers digging into the dead flesh. He prepared to rip the head from the shoulders. But the Ripper didn't struggle. He smiled, and then his body shifted. The Ripper's flesh seemed to liquefy under Aurelius's grip. Bones popped and rearranged. The Ripper's chest cavity expanded, his arms elongated, his fingers stretching into talons of bone and gristle. His coat tore as spines erupted from his back. Body horror. It wasn't just what he did to the victims, it was what he was. He was fluid, he was unstable. The Ripper's jaw unhinged, opening impossibly wide, revealing a gullet that looked like a raw wound. "Surprise!" the Ripper shrieked. He brought his knee up, driving it into Aurelius's stomach with the force of a pile driver. Aurelius flew backward, crashing into the table. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. He gasped, pain radiating through his immortal frame. He hadn't felt pain like this in a century. The Ripper was on him instantly. He didn't fight with technique. He fought with frenzy. He slashed, bit, and clawed. Aurelius felt his coat tear, felt the cold sting of claws raking his chest. He rolled away, narrowly avoiding a bite that would have taken his nose off. They circled each other in a small, blood-soaked room. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows that looked like demons cheering them on. "You cling to the old ways?" the Ripper taunted, his voice now a dual-tone harmonic, like two people speaking at once. "Discretion, masquerade, boring. The 20th century is coming, old man. It will be a century of blood, a century of war. I am the herald. I am the new god. You are a mistake," Aurelius spat. He focused. He needed to be smarter. He couldn't match this thing's chaotic strength or its malleability. He needed to use his experience. The Ripper lunged again, arms outstretched like a mantis. Aurelius didn't dodge. He stepped into the attack. He took the blow. The Ripper's claws sank into Aurelius's left shoulder, tearing muscle. Aurelius screamed but didn't retreat. He used the connection to trap the Ripper's arm. With his right hand, Aurelius grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. The tip was glowing cherry red, and Aurelius hissed. He drove the red-hot iron into the Ripper's chest, aiming for where the heart should be. The sound was horrific, the hiss of searing dead flesh, the screech of the Ripper. The creature thrashed, its form becoming unstable. Faces pushed out from its skin, the faces of Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes screaming in unison, a chorus of the damned trapped within his biomass. "Get out! Get out!" the Ripper howled, clawing at the poker. Aurelius didn't let go. He pushed harder, driving the iron through the creature and into the wooden wall behind it, pinning him like an insect. "You want to be famous?" Aurelius roared, his face inches from the writhing monstrosity. "You want them to know your name? They will never know. You will be a shadow, a question mark, a ghost story to frighten children." The Ripper's eyes widened. The fire from the poker seemed to spread inside him, igniting the volatile, rotten gases of his biology. "No," the Ripper gurgled. "I am Jack. You are nothing," Aurelius said. He grabbed a heavy kerosene lamp from the shattered table and smashed it over the Ripper's head. The oil soaked the creature. The flames from the grate leaped. The room exploded in fire. The Ripper shrieked a sound that shattered the single window of the room. He thrashed, trying to pull free from the poker, but the fire was consuming him rapidly, burning with a supernatural intensity. The fledgling vampire, composed of rot and magic, burned far hotter than wood. He was a candle made of grease and sin. Aurelius stumbled back, shielding his face. The heat was blistering. He watched as the Ripper melted. Literally melted. The bones collapsed. The flesh ran like wax, until there was nothing left but a charred, unrecognizable stain on the wall and the floor. The fire was spreading to the bed, to the curtains. Aurelius looked at the remains of Mary Jane Kelly. He felt a pang of genuine sorrow. She had been the stage for this monster's vanity. "Rest," he whispered. He turned and walked out of the room, into the courtyard. He didn't run. He walked. He was burned, bleeding. his shoulder a ruin of torn meat. But he was alive. He slipped into the shadows just as the first shouts of fire rang out from the neighbors. Aurelius sat on the roof of the Christ Church Spitalfields, watching the smoke rise from Miller's Court. The fire brigade had arrived, their horses clattering, water pumps straining. They would find the body of Mary Kelly. They would blame Jack the Ripper. But the murders would stop. The papers would speculate. They would say he died or emigrated or was committed to an asylum. Some would say he was a doctor, some a prince. Only Aurelius knew the truth. He looked at his hands. They were stained with soot and dried blood. He felt old, older than his 3 centuries. The Ripper had been right about one thing. The world was changing. The brutality was becoming industrialized. The shadows were shrinking, bleached out by electric lights and camera flashes. The mystery was dying, replaced by the spectacle. The era of the gentleman vampire was ending. The era of the monster was beginning. Aurelius pulled his torn coat tighter around him. The fog was rolling in again, covering the city in a merciful white shroud. He would heal. He would survive. He always did. He was the cockroach in the walls of history. But as he looked out over the sprawling, sleeping city, he realized that the hunger in his gut had changed. It was no longer just a physical need. It was a longing for a world that was gone. He stood up, a dark silhouette against the moon. "Let them have their gaslights," he whispered to the wind. "I still own the dark." He stepped off the ledge. He did not fall. He dissolved. He became mist, he became bat, he became nothing. He left the crimson fog of Whitechapel behind him, a survivor in a world that was slowly learning how to outmonster the monsters. The fog swirled, thick and impenetrable, holding its secrets tight. And deep within the mist, the city slept, unaware of how close it had come to the abyss, and unaware of the silent guardian who had burned the nightmare away. The reign of Jack was over. But the night was still long, and Aurelius was still thirsty. Still awake? Well, let's move on to the next story. The bloom of Blackwood. The humidity in the Blackwood was not merely a condition of the weather. It was a physical weight, a wet wool blanket draped over the lungs, smelling of ozone and crushed petals. Elias adjusted the straps of his rucksack, the nylon biting into shoulders, already tender from 3 days of hiking. He watched the back of Sarah's head as she hacked at a wall of ferns with a machete that had lost its edge miles ago. Behind him, Marcus breathed in heavy, ragged hitches, the sound of a man who had smoked too much and walked too little. They were looking for Oakhaven, a name that tasted of dry dust and old paper in Elias's mouth. It was a ghost story for geographers, a town erased from the maps of the Pacific Northwest in 1924, following a botanical anomaly. Sarah called it the Holy Grail of forgotten lore. Marcus called it a weekend trip. Elias, driven by a survivalist paranoia and a quiet, gnawing curiosity, just called it a mistake. But he followed. He always followed. The forest changed as they crossed the ridge. The pines and firs, stoic sentinels of the mountains, gave way to something older and decidedly wrong. The trees here were twisted, their bark peeling like sunburned skin to reveal slick, dark wood beneath. But it was the undergrowth that seized Elias's attention. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, stopping so abruptly, Marcus nearly collided with her. She pointed the tip of her machete at a sprawling cluster of vines strangling the base of a rotting cedar. The leaves were shaped like arrowheads, deeply serrated and colored a bruised, violent purple that verged on black. Hanging from the tangled mass were bell-shaped flowers, heavy and pendulous, dripping a clear, viscous nectar onto the dead needles below. "Nightshade," Elias said, his voice low, "but nothing I've ever seen. The stems are too thick. Look at the thorns." The thorns were inch-long, recurved hooks, glistening with a reddish sheen. They looked less like plant matter and more like the serrated teeth of a deep-sea fish. "It's Salem, all right," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with the manic energy that overtook her when she smelled history. "But mutated, hyper-aggressive. This is it, Elias. We're in the blast radius." "Blast radius implies an explosion," Marcus grumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty bandana. "This is just a weed patch. Can we keep moving? The sun's dropping, and I don't want to camp in a briar patch." Elias looked up. The canopy was so dense, the sky was a fractured mosaic of gray and violet. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the primal sensation of being watched. He scanned the tree line. Nothing but the swaying of the black vines and a wind he couldn't feel. "Let's move," Elias said, unholstering the hatchet at his belt. "But keep your eyes open. The ground here, it feels hollow." They pushed on. As they descended into the valley, the vegetation became a monolithic entity. The trail Sarah had been following on her crumbling 1,922nd survey map vanished entirely, swallowed by the creeping carpet of the strange nightshade. The silence of the woods deepened. There were no birds, no squirrels chattering, just the wet thwack of Sarah's machete and the squelch of their boots in mud that smelled of copper and rot. It took another hour before the trees broke, revealing the valley floor. Oak Haven lay before them like a corpse left out in the sun. It was not a ruin in the traditional sense. The buildings were standing Victorian heaps with gabled roofs and wraparound porches, but they were clothed in the earth. The nightshade had claimed everything. Massive, rope-like vines, thick as a man's thigh, coiled around columns and crushed chimneys. The town was a uniform shade of bruise, purple and black, punctuated by the glowing pale berries that clustered like cataracts on the walls. "My God," Sarah breathed, pulling out her camera. The shutter click sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. "It's preserved," Marcus said, stepping forward, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Look at the glass in the windows. It's not broken. It's just covered." Elias didn't take a picture. He didn't step forward. He watched the town, his eyes narrowing. The geometry was wrong. The vines weren't just growing over the houses, they were structural. In some places, where wood had rotted away, the vines had woven themselves into the shape of walls and beams, holding the buildings up in a mockery of architecture. "We shouldn't go down there," Elias said. "We came all this way," Sarah countered, already adjusting her pack. "The library is supposed to be in the town hall. That's where the records are. The manifesto of the founder? It's a dead zone, Sarah. Look at the air." A low mist hung over the streets, swirling sluggishly. It carried that sickly sweet scent, cloying and heavy, like lilies at a funeral, masking the smell of decay beneath. 10 minutes, Marcus said, clapping Elias on the shoulder. "We grab the creepy book, we take some selfies, we hike back to the ridge to camp. Come on, Survivor Man, don't lose your nerve now." Elias tightened his grip on his hatchet. He wasn't losing his nerve. His nerve was the only thing functioning. Every instinct he had honed over years of outdoor trekking was screaming at him to turn around and run until his lungs burned. But he nodded. He wouldn't leave them. The descent into Oak Haven was a journey into twilight. The moment they crossed the perimeter of the town, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The air was thick with pollen that tasted metallic. They walked down what used to be Main Street. The asphalt was gone, broken apart by roots that pulsed with a slow hydraulic rhythm. Elias walked in the rear, constantly checking behind them. The vines they passed seemed to settle after they walked by. A trick of the eye, he told himself. Pareidolia. But the feeling of claustrophobia was intense. The bellflowers hung from the telephone wires overhead. Swaying. "Town hall should be at the end of the street," Sarah said, her voice hushed. "Big brick building." They passed a general store. Through the window, obscured by a lattice of thin, hair-like creepers, Elias saw shelves still stocked with rusted tin cans. A skeleton sat in a chair behind the counter. Elias stopped. "Sarah." She turned, following his gaze. "Oh, that's not right," Marcus whispered, his face paling. The skeleton wasn't just sitting. It was integrated. The vines had grown through the rib cage, wrapping around the spine, blooming out of the eye sockets. The skull was tilted toward the door, the jaw hanging open in an eternal scream filled with a cluster of white berries. The plants didn't grow over him, Elias said, the horror cold in his gut. They grew inside him. He must have died and the nature took over, Sarah rationalized, though her voice wavered. It's been 100 years. Let's just get the book and go, Marcus said, walking faster now. They reached the town hall. It was a fortress of vegetation. The double doors were gone, replaced by a curtain of thick, thorny briars. Sarah stepped forward with her machete, but Elias grabbed her wrist. Don't cut it, he hissed. How else do we get in? Don't cut it, he repeated. He pointed to the ground near the threshold. A dead deer lay there. It was fresh, maybe a day old. It was entangled in the roots, half absorbed, but where the roots touched the flesh, the skin was dissolved, and the vines around it were bright red, engorged. It digests, Elias said. Contact poison, or acid. Sarah swallowed hard, pulling her hand back. Okay. We find another way. And they found a window on the second floor that was relatively clear. Marcus boosted Sarah up. Then Elias boosted Marcus. Elias scrambled up last, his boots scraping against the brickwork. As he pulled himself over the sill, his hand brushed a small, serrated leaf. A shock went through his arm, like a static discharge, but painful. He jerked back, tumbling onto the dusty floor of the interior. You okay? Marcus asked. Stung me. Elias rubbed his glove. The leather was discolored where the leaf had touched. Don't touch anything green. Anything. They were in a hallway. The interior of the town hall was surprisingly intact, though the air was choked with dust and spores. The floorboards creaked ominously under their weight. They used their flashlights, the beams, cutting through the gloom. Roots ran along the ceiling like exposed wiring, pulsating gently. The library's downstairs, Sarah said. We have to go down. They descended the grand staircase. The silence inside was oppressive. It wasn't empty silence. It was a held breath. The wood of the stairs groaned, but beneath that Elias heard something else. A wet, sliding sound, like snakes moving over velvet. Did you hear that? He whispered. Hear what? Marcus asked, his flashlight darting around. Movement. Probably rats, Sarah said, though she didn't sound convinced. Or the house settling. They reached the library. It was a cavernous room, smelling of moldering paper. The shelves were still standing, filled with rotting books, but the center of the room was dominated by a massive root, thick as a redwood trunk, that had punched through the floor and went straight up through the ceiling. Smaller tendrils branched off it, plugging into the rows of books like data cables. Jackpot, Sarah whispered, moving toward a desk that looked like a librarian station. It was covered in vines, but a heavy ledger lay open, protected by a glass case that had been cracked but not shattered. Sarah carefully lifted the glass. She shone her light on the pages. October 14th, 1924, she read. The bloom is absolute. We cannot cut it back. Fire does not work. The smoke drives the men to madness. It screams when we burn it. She turned the page. October 16th, they are not dead. I can hear them in the garden. Mrs. Higgins, who passed on Tuesday, she spoke to me from the flower bed. She said it is warm in the earth. She said we should join them. Sarah stopped reading. Her hand trembled. October 20th, she whispered. We are hungry. The sunlight is not enough. We need meat. Okay, that's it, Marcus said, his voice high and tight. We got the story. The plants are evil. Let's go. Wait, Elias said. He was looking at the massive central root. On the surface of the bark, shapes were forming. Not random bumps, faces, stretching as if pressing against a latex sheet. He recognized the geometry of a human nose, a brow ridge, a screaming mouth. Do you hear that? Elias asked again. This time, they all heard it. It started as a rustle, a dry friction of leaves rubbing together. Then, the sound clarified. It wasn't wind. It was 1,000 tiny whispers, overlapping, syncing up. Hungry, warm, join, fresh. The wind? Marcus asked, stepping back. No, Elias said, drawing his hatchet. It's the room. Suddenly, the door they had entered through slammed shut. Not by a draft, but by 4 thick vines that whipped down from the lintel and lashed together, sealing the exit. Marcus screamed. He swung his flashlight wildly. The shadows in the corners of the room were moving. The vines on the bookshelves were uncoiling, lifting their heads like cobras. The flowers turned toward them. Run. Elias yelled. Where? Sarah shrieked. The window. The high windows. Elias grabbed a heavy chair, rotting upholstery exploding in a cloud of dust, and hurled it at a high arched window covered in a lattice of thinner vines. The glass shattered, but the vines held the chair, catching it like a web. The floorboards beneath Marcus exploded. A tendril, thick as a python, shot up and wrapped around his ankle. Marcus hit the ground hard, his chin cracking against the wood. Help! Help me! Elias lunged. He brought the hatchet down with all his strength. The blade bit into the vine. It didn't feel like chopping wood. It felt like chopping frozen meat. A spray of black, steaming ichor hit Elias in the face, burning his skin. The vine thrashed, letting out a sound, a high-pitched tea kettle shriek that vibrated in Elias's teeth. Marcus scrambled back, kicking wildly. The severed vine writhed on the floor, leaking black blood, trying to reattach itself. Up! Get up! Elias hauled Marcus to his feet. The library was coming alive. Every root, every leaf was orienting toward them. The whispers grew to a roar. Marcus, Sarah, Elias. It knows our names, Sarah sobbed, backing toward the center of the room, away from the walls. It heard us, Elias realized. It's a hive mind. It's been listening since we walked in. The massive central trunk groaned. The wood split open, revealing a wet pink interior that pulsed like raw muscle. From the fissure, a figure emerged. It was humanoid, composed of woven roots and wet leaves, but the face was a perfect, preserved human face, embedded in the plant matter. It was a man in 1,922 spectacles. The mayor, Sarah whispered. The creature opened its mouth, but the voice came from everywhere at once. The soil is rich, the mayor thing gurgled, but the mind is dry. We need new stories. Flashlights. Elias barked. Strobe, disorient it. It's a plant, Elias, Marcus yelled, clutching his bruised leg. It's a predator. Predators have eyes. Elias switched his tactical light to strobe and aimed it at the mayor thing. The creature recoiled, shielding its face with a hand made of thorns. The whispers turned into hisses of annoyance. The fireplace. Elias pointed to the massive stone hearth at the far end. The chimney was blocked, but the grate was heavy iron. Help me with the table. What? We barricade the hearth. We burn it out. You said fire makes it scream, Sarah cried. Good. Let it scream. Elias and Marcus heaved a heavy oak table, flipping it onto its side to create a V-shaped wedge in front of the massive fireplace. They scrambled behind it just as the library exploded into violence. Vines slashed out like whips, cracking against the oak table. Thorns gouged deep furrows in the wood. Elias grabbed the antique books from the shelves within reach, dry, brittle paper, and threw them into the hearth. He ripped the lining from his jacket. Lighter. And Marcus fumbled with shaking hands, producing a Zippo. He flicked it. The flame was tiny, pathetic against the encroaching dark. Elias lit the jacket lining and shoved it into the pile of books. The paper caught instantly, A century of dried dust and brittle pages went up in a roar of orange. Smoke billowed out, filling their small barricade, but Elias kicked the burning books outward toward the encroaching vines. The reaction was immediate and horrific. The plants didn't just burn, they convulsed. The leaves curled and shriveled, emitting that screaming sound again, a chorus of agony. The mare thing thrashed, its root body flailing. "The smoke," Elias coughed, eyes watering. "It's toxic. Better than being eaten," Marcus yelled. The fire spread to the carpet, then to the shelves. The library was becoming an oven. The heat drove the vines back, retreating into the shadows, chattering in pain. "We have to move," Elias said, tying his bandana over his nose and mouth. "While they're stunned, the door is blocked." Sarah screamed over the roar of the fire. "The fire weakens them. The door vines will be retreating. Go!" They charged through the smoke. The heat was blistering. Elias swung his hatchet blindly, severing twitching tendrils that tried to grab them. They reached the double doors. The vines sealing them were charred and writhing, losing their grip. Marcus threw his shoulder against the wood. The doors burst open. They spilled out into the main hall. The smoke followed them, a billowing gray cloud. Out of the building. They sprinted for the window they had entered. The house was waking up fully now. The floorboards rippled like water. The wallpaper peeled back to reveal pulsating veins in the plaster. Elias boosted Sarah out. She tumbled onto the grass outside. "Marcus, go!" Marcus scrambled up. Elias pushed his legs. Marcus fell out. Elias grabbed the sill. A cold, wet grip seized his ankle. He looked down. A hand, a human hand, pale and bloodless, protruding from the floorboards had him. And another. And another. They were pulling him down. "Elias!" Sarah screamed from outside. He kicked, his boot connecting with a wrist that snapped like a twig. He hacked at the floor with his hatchet, severing fingers that didn't bleed but leaked sap. He roared, a primal sound of exertion, and vaulted through the window. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He scrambled up, gasping, "Run to the tree line." They ran. They didn't look back at the town hall, which was now vomiting black smoke from every orifice. They sprinted up Main Street, their boots pounding the cracked pavement. But the town was ready for them now. The mist had thickened to a wall, and from the mist they came. They weren't just vines anymore. They were the inhabitants, shambling figures made of root and bone, holding the shapes of men, women, and children. They moved with a jerky, puppet-like gait, their feet rooted to the ground, sliding through the earth like sharks through water. "Join us," a figure in a tattered postman's uniform wheezed, its face a cluster of purple berries. "It is so lonely in the dark." "Don't listen," Elias yelled. "Don't listen to them." "My mom." Marcus slowed down, his eyes glazing over. He was looking at a figure emerging from a garden, a woman made of roses and thorns. "That sounds like my mom." "Marcus, no." Elias grabbed his collar, yanking him forward. "It's reading your mind. It's a lure." But she's crying." Marcus resisted. The psychological weight of the place was pressing down on them. The hum in the air was hypnotic. It promised rest. It promised an end to the pain in their legs, the fear in their hearts. "Just lie down," the voices whispered in Elias's head. "Just close your eyes. We will keep you safe. We will keep you forever." Elias bit his tongue hard. The sharp copper taste of blood cleared the fog for a second. "Pain is real," he grunted. "Pain is life. Move." They reached the edge of the town. The forest boundary was 50 yards away, but between them and the trees stood the nightshade wall, a hedge of thorns 10 feet high, woven tight. "We're trapped," Sarah cried, falling to her knees. The shambling figures were closing in. The town hall was an inferno behind them, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping claws. Elias looked at the wall. Then he looked at Marcus. who was weeping, staring at the rose woman. "Marcus!" Elias slapped him hard. "I need the lighter fluid. You have a refill in your pack." Marcus blinked, the spell fracturing. "What?" "The fluid. Give it to me." Marcus fumbled in his bag and tossed the yellow can to Elias. Elias turned to Sarah. "Give me your scarf." He soaked the scarf in lighter fluid. He wrapped it around the head of his hatchet. He doused the rest of the fluid onto the base of the thorn wall. "Get back," Elias said. He lit the hatchet. It flared up, a torch in the gloom. He swung. He didn't hack at the vines. He struck the fluid-soaked ground. The fire whooshed up, catching the dried underbrush beneath the nightshade. The wall of thorns caught fire with terrifying speed. The oils in the plant were highly flammable. The wall screamed. It wasn't a metaphor. A cacophony of human shrieks erupted from the burning hedge as it thrashed, pulling apart. "Through the fire," Elias commanded. "Are you crazy?" "Better burnt than absorbed. Go." He grabbed Sarah and shoved her through the gap where the vines were recoiling from the heat. He grabbed Marcus by the belt and threw him after her. Elias took one last look at Oakhaven. The rose woman was standing 10 feet away. She wasn't chasing them. She was smiling. A split in the bark of her face revealed a human skull beneath. "We will wait," she whispered, and the voice was inside his ear, intimate and cold. "You have breathed the spores, Elias. You are already carrying the garden." Elias turned and ran through the flames. The heat singed his eyebrows and blistered his skin, but he burst through into the cool, dark pine forest beyond. They didn't stop running until they hit the ridge. They collapsed on the stone, gasping, coughing up black phlegm. Below them, in the valley, a ring of fire burned, but the fog was already smothering it. The screams had faded to a low, rhythmic thrumming. "We made it," Marcus wheezed, staring at the sky. "We're out." Sarah was shaking, clutching her camera. "The map. I left the map." "Doesn't matter," Elias said, staring at his hands. He looked at the back of his hand. There was a small scratch where the leaf had stung him hours ago. The redness had faded, but under the skin, tracing the path of his vein, was a faint, dark line. It wasn't blue like blood. It was purple. He pressed it. It felt hard, like a root. And in the silence of the mountain, over the sound of his friend's breathing, Elias heard a sound. A tiny, scratching sound. It was coming from inside his own ear. Warm. Elias looked at the dark tree line of the normal world. He looked at Marcus and Sarah. He closed his fist, hiding the purple vein. "Yeah," Elias said, his voice hollow. "We made it." He stood up, shouldered his pack, and started walking. He knew he would never truly leave Oakhaven. He was just spreading the seeds,